Good morning. My name is Mary Mason, and I am on the Board of Trustees here at East Shore Unitarian Universalist Church in Kirtland, Ohio. Thank you for joining us here today beneath the beacon and on Facebook Live. Whether you are a member or a friend of our congregation, whether you join us every Sunday or only occasionally, whether we've known you for decades, or you've met us for the first time today, whether you are with us under the beacon or you join us from your own sacred space, you are welcome here. Acknowledging your skin color, ancestry, and expressions of gender, your net worth, your political opinions, and the people you love, and the long and winding journey that brought you here today, you are welcome. May this be a time of reflection and renewal, a time to live into our mission, to love, revere, discover, and connect. And since we are still in the midst of a very high rate of COVID transmission, only the choir will sing today, but please open your hymnal, your gray hymnal, to number 163. The choir will sing this as the anthem this morning. Since it is difficult to articulate the words with our masks on, please follow the words in your hymnal.
Good morning. I am Reverend Rina Shere, and it's so good to be with you today. And I have to say, the words of the anthem that really struck me this morning were, "For the sun." It's a beautiful fall day here in Northeast Ohio, and we are grateful that you made the decision to start your day with worship together. It is so good to see your faces. Please hear these words as we come together for worship. We come together this hour to be released from the turmoil of the world. For many of us, confusion has permeated our week, and we seek solace here in this sacred space. We come together this hour to know joy in our mutual fellowship and to find comfort in each other's presence. We come together this hour to renew our spirit so that we may be the justice makers that our religion calls us to be. Bring your full self to this hour. You have brought your body. Now call forth your mind and your spirit. Let us worship together.
We light this chalice in honor of the many opportunities which lie before us to do good in the world. These opportunities stretch our hearts, minds, and bodies. This flame reminds us that we act both individually and as a community of seekers in this sacred space. Please follow along in your great hymnal for opening hymn number 134, Our Lord is One Lord. And we have a book that sits out in the narthex on a pedestal, so anyone can add a joy or concern that they would like to share. So let's look to see what the book says this week. Jared's co-worker and her son tested positive for COVID this past weekend. So Jared would like to hold them in hope for a quick recovery. So please keep them in your thoughts. Thank you to the 16 cars that were here last week for Trunk and Treat. It was a good time for all. Thank you to the universe for giving Caleb a cat. It walked into our lives right through the door and decided it lives here. I also have two joys and concern. One joy is that we have Reverend Rina with us this morning as a minister to do the sermon and to do other parts of the service. And my other joy is that we have Joyce Yu again as our pianist, who's been helping us out, and the choir and church is grateful to her. My one concern, which I never write my concerns in the book, I don't know why, and I'm sure there's many of you who don't feel inclined to share in that way. So I would like to suggest that if there's any other way you would like to share your joys or your concerns, look around, because we have a bunch of caring people in here, and you could probably find someone that would be interested in hearing your concerns and your joys. But my concern is that my 25-year-old granddaughter has just moved to Illinois to be with a man that she met on the internet, and I'm a little concerned. But she didn't ask me my opinion. I offered it anyway. And now's the time to do the placing of the stones. If you came in this morning and remembered to pick up a stone from the bowl in the back, you can hold it in your hand now and think about the period of silence that's to come. If you didn't think to pick up a stone when you came in, this would be a good time. Just go ahead and get up and go get one. And hold it in your hand, and we'll have a period of silence where joys and tears that have been shared and not shared can be part of our hearts. When the singing bowl sounds, please join in placing your stones to remember a loved one or mark an event, or just because you feel moved to do so. Please take a moment for what some call prayer and others call mindful meditation. The Spirit of life and love, we gather today with many unspoken joys and sorrows within our heart. We
are mindful of the young people in our lives who are learning to adult and learning to make decisions for themselves. And we surround them with our love and our care, knowing that those of us who are old and wise learned along the way. We hold in our hearts the many people in the world who are separated from disease and devastation and war and violence. We hold in our hearts the caregivers that continue to minister with those with COVID-19. We ask that those who struggle with feelings of loneliness and isolation, those whose minds may not be still and peaceful, that they find a moment this day to sit quietly and to feel loved and held. And we ask that all of those in this circle today remain courageous to speak their truths and to love who they choose to love, and to be the people that we were made to be. Amen. So may it be.
The story this morning is about Robert Gould Shaw, who was the head of the 54th Massachusetts Regiment during the Civil War. Robert Gould Shaw was born in 1837 and died in 1863 while the war was raging. He was the son of Sarah and Francis Shaw, who were two radical Unitarians, who were among the first to embrace transcendentalism, feminism, and abolitionism. Although Robert Gould Shaw's parents were rather radical Unitarians and, of course, raised him that way, They impressed upon him that it was man's paramount duty to serve the human race, but he still didn't show much of an inclination to follow in their footsteps as a major reformer or as a radical reformer, until he took the awesome responsibility of commanding one of the first regiments of black troops. He accepted that challenge reluctantly. In fact, initially he turned it down. He was uncertain about what that would entail. He had never led a regiment before, and he was already embedded with his own regiment and had bonded with those guys and wanted to continue to serve with them. But being that his parents were rather radical, I believe there was some pressure put on him, and he eventually changed his mind and agreed to train and work with the 1st Black Regiment. In 1863, the Civil War was already raging. It had begun more than 2 years earlier when some southern states had declared they were separating from the Union to form a separate nation called the Confederacy. Soldiers were fighting to protect the southern way of life, which of course depended on slavery. The Union soldiers were fighting to keep the nation together as one country. So for them, for some of them at least, the fight was about abolishing slavery. Governor John Andrew of Massachusetts was a man who cared very much about ending slavery, and he wanted to give free blacks a chance to serve in the military. So he decided to form a black regiment and get them trained and try to prove to people that black regiments were adequate, not only adequate, but could serve quite well in the military and in that war. And I have to say that in order to do that, these black soldiers were taking on a real risk, over and above the risk that all soldiers take in a war. If they were fighting in the Confederacy for the Union and had been captured, they either would have been dead or they would have been returned to slavery. So these free blacks were taking on quite a burden. Governor Andrew had asked the federal government for permission to raise this regiment of free blacks to fight alongside white regiments in the Union Army. And he was finally granted permission. So the 54th Massachusetts Regiment would be the first one to give free blacks from the North an opportunity to prove their worth as soldiers. Governor Andrew knew that this experiment must not fail. The commanders had to be experienced white officers, and Governor Andrew knew who he wanted as colonel. He wanted Robert Gould Shaw. So after Shaw reluctantly accepted the duties, he was a little nervous at first about it. He wasn't sure how to approach an all-black regiment and whether or not the training would be the same as what was being done for the white regiments. But after a few days, he quickly changed his mind and he accepted the position, and he found out that, lo and behold, the black regiment was quite effective, trained very well, and he was quite thrilled with the progress he made with that group of people. He even had to recruit them first, of course, which was a difficult step to begin with, and then he had to train them. So he was very proud of the way this was turning out. And being in the North, there was a lot of enthusiasm in the public. They heard about this, and there was a lot of enthusiasm. So when this regiment was finally ready to march off to war, there was a big parade, and a lot of people came out, and it was quite a glorious event. However, once he and his men reached the South to begin their fighting, they found that they weren't being given any important assignments. And even worse, Shaw discovered that his men were going to be paid less than the white soldiers. He sent a letter of protest, and he encouraged his men to refuse their pay altogether until equality in pay was granted. Then when Shaw's regiment finally went out on a raid, they were led by a commander named Montgomery, who had a reputation for being unnecessarily destructive. They went to the beautiful town of Darien, Georgia, where they actually found no soldiers and no resistance. Nevertheless, Montgomery ordered his men to loot the buildings, take whatever they wanted, and burn the town down. Shaw was outraged. He refused to participate in the burning of the town, but even so, his regiment ended up being associated with that, and Shaw never got over the shame that he felt for that whole incident. He worried that the reputation of his black troops would be forever tarnished, and he worked harder to make his regiment have a chance to fight alongside whites in a meaningful battle that would bring them some glory and some honor. When that opportunity came, Shaw seized upon it. He accepted the orders to lead an assault against a strong fortification known as Fort Wagner. In the days before the attack, Shaw and his troops had been exposed to soaking rains, a lack of food, they were deprived of sleep, but when the time came, they bravely rushed forward. They had to climb an earthwork battlement that protected the fort, so Colonel Shaw led his men up the steep embankment as gunfire rained upon them. When he reached the top, he was shot and his body fell into the enemy fort. When the battle was over, the Confederates wanted to deny Shaw the honor of a proper burial, so they threw his body into a mass grave along with many of his men. They thought of this as an insult, but Robert Shaw's father turned the situation into something a little more glorious. He let it be known that his son would have felt greatly honored to lie on the field of battle along with his men. The story of Robert Gould Shaw's courage and commitment made him a national hero. The competence and valor of his men brought them honor and forever changed the country's reluctance to recruit black soldiers. The men of the 54th Regiment did not win the battle at Fort Wagner, and many of them died there. But those who survived won the right to equal pay 18 months after Shaw led them in protest. They became the model for many successful regiments of black soldiers. When the Civil War finally ended in victory for the Union, President Lincoln believed that the black regiments had turned the tide. Robert Gould Shaw's noble sacrifice for his country and for the rights of African Americans is still remembered as an example of heroism for a just cause. When I was reading this, I started thinking about this regiments of black soldiers, and it occurred to me how long it took to have the public, even in the North and the South, accept the fact that you didn't need to have regiments of black soldiers. You could have integrated blacks into regiments of soldiers. But I guess the time was not right. This was 1863 we're talking about. But it's an interesting thing that to note that we still had regiments of black soldiers up to and through World War II, which I find shocking, but I'm not sure how many people are even aware of that. So that is our story for this morning. If we had any children here, we would dismiss them to their classes.
So the whole month of November, the worship theme is holding history. And so the worship leaders will be sharing and looking at history in different ways throughout this month. And one of the reasons why I asked to be able to be here on today, the 11th, is because it's so close to Veterans Day. And so I wanted to share some of the history about Unitarian and Universalists and how we understand and how we hold our history around ideas of war and peace. And because my days are spent working at the VA, so I'm, working with veterans in the role as chaplain. And so I very intimately am able to witness to kind of the after effects of combat, of war. And our denomination really has a kind of complicated relationship with the military and with ideas of pacifism. So before we begin, I would like to ask if there are any veterans with us this morning. Okay, so we do have some. So this is a chance to acknowledge your service and to let you know that as a VA chaplain, I am not only the worship leader, but always a chaplain to you in particular, for whatever you might need. So I am a child of the 60s and 70s, and I was not raised to be particularly patriotic by my family. My father had been drafted into the Army to serve in Korea because he forgot to send in his college deferment form. Which sounds funny, but it's really not, because it drastically changed his life. He never wanted to talk about his time in Korea with me or my sister. He had one photo album with lots of photos that documented the very hot summers and the very cold, snowy winters. He was in the Shoreline Valley, and he was in a tank. He was wounded in Korea, so he was a combat soldier, and he also contracted malaria. And I remember one time as a child seeing him on our couch in a malarial fever, and he was screaming, and because he was having flashbacks of being in the tank and knowing that soldiers were coming toward them. And now that I minister to soldiers with post-traumatic stress and moral injury, I'm fairly certain that my father suffered from it for a variety of reasons beyond the flashback, but a lot of his behavior. He was very emotionally distant. He had a deep kind of mistrust of people and the future. He had a very dependent relationship with alcohol, and the links between post-traumatic stress and substance use are very, very high. My childhood was also filled with images of the Vietnam War on TV, and the POWs and Watergate. And I kind of grew up with the distrust of government and the military, and certainly with images of shame of some of our Vietnam veterans who returned home and were treated really terribly. And I don't know if any of you saw the wonderful documentary by Lynn Novick and Ken Burns, The Vietnam War. Did anyone here see that? So that was just brilliant and very difficult to watch. Parts of it were very, very difficult to watch. A lot of my Vietnam veterans were not able to watch all of that because it just brought it back too viscerally for them. And it was really not until the events of 9/11 that I felt called to have an American flag, hanging out on my door. I was a member of Code Pink for several years. Code Pink is a women-run group that protests wars and violence. I took my boys to protest marches. And I had really placed myself on kind of this high moral ground of being against war, against military funding, against all of this. And it was very easy for me to make it a really short message. War is bad and we shouldn't do it, and those who are for it, they must somehow be bad too. And when I became the mother of two sons, I just always taught them, nobody wins in a war. Nobody wins in a war. In short, I didn't take the time to get to know people who were in the military. I didn't have proximity. Brian Stevenson talks so much about proximity when he's talking about how do we know people who aren't like us. So it was a very one-sided conversation. I was very one-dimensional about this issue. And I joined my first Unitarian Universalist church in 2001. So it's been 20 years now that I've been at UU. And for many, many years, I perceived our religion, our denomination, to be firmly rooted in the peace movement, because that was kind of what I had gravitated toward in our denomination. But as I entered seminary and began really studying more and more of the history of Unitarians and Universalists, I learned that our faith tradition has been involved in serving the military since the birth of our nation in the Revolutionary War, when George Washington commissioned the first 15 military chaplains to attend to the spiritual needs of the troops. And Universalist minister John Murray was one of those first military chaplains, and most of us know him as washing ashore in Good Luck, New Jersey, and preaching this message of universal love and salvation in the 1760s. But he also served as a chaplain in the Revolutionary War, because George Washington understood that spiritual crises are a real byproduct of combat. And he knew that the role of the chaplain was really indispensable to the care of the soldier's soul. And as you could see by the story that Mary shared with us today, both Unitarians and Universalists were involved in many aspects of the Civil War. Many of our great preachers were responsible for agitating against slavery in both speech and in print. Others, like Robert Gould, actively fought and led troops in combat. However, by the end of the 19th century, we begin to see a more of a strain of peace and pacifism begin to emerge in some of our Unitarian and Universalist preachers and thinkers. As World War I loomed, the prominent Unitarians such as Jane Addams, Jenkins Lloyd Jones, John Haynes Holm, and Universalist Clarence Skinner began to preach their opposition to the involvement of the United States in what is known as the Great War. In 1915, Reverend John Haynes Holm stood in the pulpit of First Unitarian Church in New York and declared, "Never will I take up arms against a foe. And if because of cowardice or malice I do this awful thing, may God in his anger strike me dead, ere I strike dead some brother from another land." Those are very strong words, cowardice or malice. Nobody wants to be seen as a coward or as venal, having a venal nature. Holmes was an outlier, however, and the American Unitarian Association supported World War I. It did not support Reverend Holmes, even though he was one of the most prominent thinkers and preachers in our movement at that time. The association really did not want anti-war ministers creating any confusion about patriotism, about the party line of patriotism in our churches. And in April 1918, the association passed a resolution in support of war for freedom and humanity. So 100 years ago, that would be like our National Association now promoting a statement saying war for freedom and humanity. So think of how different it is right now. But this is part of our history. The organization then denied support for any church that hired an anti-war minister. And it was not until 1936 that the Unitarian General Assembly voted to repudiate this 1918 statement. An important part of our denominational history is understanding that there was an immense animosity toward those who spoke their truth about America's engagement with war and violence. Unitarian and Universalist ministers who advocated with peace were met with rejection. And then came World War II and the horrors of Hitler and the massacres in Europe. As Americans, we were attacked on our own soil in Pearl Harbor, and we rushed to defend our country and our honor. And while many Unitarians and Universalists served in the military, this was also the beginning of the Unitarian Service Committee, which really helped to, it was formed to help victims of the Nazi brutality and trying to help people escape from some of these countries where people of certain ethnicity or religion would be murdered. And the flaming chalice was developed during World War II as a symbol of trust and sanctuary for those fleeing from persecution. And some of you may have seen the film about the Unitarians, Martha and Wade Still Sharp. Yes. And they accepted a command from the American Unitarian Association to go to Czechoslovakia and to really help smuggle a lot of these refugees to safety. And it really kind of ruined their own family life. Their children had a lot of feelings about being left, and they eventually divorced. But they accepted the challenge from the AUA. And so both Unitarians and Universalists were really united in supporting this war. But then, 20 years later, we get to Vietnam. 30 years later, we get to Vietnam. And this war was extremely divisive, not only in our denomination, but in our country. I mean, it's one of the big dividing lines in our country's history, almost like the Civil War. And in 1967, at the Arlington Street Church in Boston, 280 young men turned over their draft cards to the clergy, thereby relinquishing their draft immunity and inviting arrest. 60 other young men burned their draft cards in the chancel of Arlington Street that day. And this action was not universally accepted in our faith. It set off round after round of debate, often very acrimonious among our clergy, among the lay people, and the seminarians about the relationship of Unitarian Universalism with our government and with the military. And at the Unitarian Church in Louisville, Kentucky, the divide was so sharp that the church actually split in two. And it wasn't until many, many years later that the two groups came back together and rejoined. And currently there appear to be more of us UUs who are opposing U.S. military actions abroad in places like Afghanistan and Africa and the Middle East. I mean, we just had to pull out, from our longest war, 20 years in Afghanistan. And many of the men and women I work with who are there are really suffering moral injury over that. The question, what was it worth for me to be over there? What was it worth is lingering. And that's a question only each person can answer for themselves. But I think they would tell you that they have found that war cannot really create a solution to the ruptured relationships that we have around the globe. But I do know one thing, and that it's our responsibility to care for the veterans when they come back, whether we agree with it or not, right? Part of living in a democracy is that we take care of each other. So we have a responsibility to be healers and to be a presence for hope and care. And what I've learned through my time at the VA is that people join the military for many, many reasons. Now that there's no draft, right? Patriotism, honor, discipline, desperation is often called the economic draft now, because there are so many people who join the military who come from what we would call an impoverished family or background. And there are times in our history when men have been drafted, like my father, who would not have made the choice, but he didn't have a choice. And I never know when I'm at the hospital how someone is going to feel about their service. I don't know how the men in our congregation today feel about their service, and I don't want to assume anything. Often veterans speak about their service with pride. I recently walked into the room of a Vietnam vet who was an Army Ranger, and he now has stage 4 brain cancer. And I'm there to talk to him about his hospice options. And we talk about his life. We do kind of a life review when someone is at this stage, and they're thinking about their legacy. And he cries as he talks about his Army days and his buddies. And he says, I cry a lot because I'm really patriotic, Jen. It gets to me. And then I walk into a room on another floor, also a Vietnam Army Ranger, and I say, how is your spiritual health today? Because this is often an opening question. And he says, I'm not okay, Jen. I'm not okay because I killed people in the war. I gave orders for people to kill. And my religion taught me that it's not okay to kill. And so I have to ask him, what does your religion tell you about forgiveness and compassion and grace? Because I know if his religion cannot help him find a path to integrating and accepting all of the parts of his lived experience into who he is today as a man, as a person, he has a difficult future ahead of him. And so this is kind of the work of chaplaincy with veterans. Because when we train human beings how to take a life, how to kill, we are stepping into very sacred territory. When we train our soldiers how to face the reality of their own death, we are in the province of the holy. When we talk about life and death, it's always a spiritual conversation, always. As we work to reintegrate veterans who have come back to us, sometimes terribly changed, not always, but sometimes, we are faced with the task of integrating personally and as a society what these lives mean to us. What does this service, this sacrifice mean to us back here, stateside, in this democracy we call the United States of America? The heart of my Unitarian Universalist faith calls me to work with others in what we call the beloved community. And the term beloved community also kind of brings us back to Martin Luther King Jr. and the civil rights struggles. But the larger concept of beloved community is to be able to integrate our experiences as human beings into who we are so that we are well integrated to go out and to serve others. And a long-standing part of our faith tradition is to be able to really embody our beliefs into the community at large. There's a wonderful African proverb that says, pray with your feet. That's what it looks like to really embody the values that you are committed to in the larger world. And this is really the legacy of Unitarian Universalism. We're kind of a pray with our feet denomination. Whether you want to use the word pray or lead with your values, whatever, but it's get out there in the world. And my religion calls me to create spaces in my daily life and in the lives of the veterans I serve and in our faith communities for healing and for conversation. Because I need to be able to respectfully listen to what you have to say about a topic that I may disagree with. And my hope is that you would also listen to me about a conversation that perhaps we disagree with. So I have to be able to really discuss issues of war and peace all day with people, holding my values, but respecting and listening to another person's story to understand why do you hold your values. But I do know that I'm responsible for helping you heal when you are with me in my role as chaplain. And so this is how we make the beloved community each day. So we can all contribute to the beloved community by continuing to reflect on how our actions each day can be a healing force in the larger world. Because I do believe healing leads to peace wherever we are. Whether it's in Kirtland, Ohio, or whether it's in the Shoreline Valley, where my father, Private Jack Shere, was, or whether it's in Afghanistan, the border in Mexico, wherever it might be. And our faith can give us hope. So as Veterans Day approaches, take time to remember. Hold in your hearts those who have fought our many, many battles. And think about the ones who have returned, that are changed, and maybe in need of your healing. understand what your role will be in the work that we are all appointed to do through our faith beliefs. May it be so. And now we come to the time where we give generously, another way of praying with our feet, through the offering of gifts. And this Sunday, your gifts will be given to Silent Witness Home Safe Program, an organization founded in 1978 to help victims of domestic violence, offering emergency shelter, crisis intervention, outreach, and education. Give generously as you are able.
Thank you for your generous contributions to the wellness of East Shore. Your gifts demonstrate your stewardship of our church and make it possible for us to live our values to love, discover, revere, and connect. As a member of the Board of Trustees, I assure you that your board will be responsible stewards of your gifts.
I invite you to listen to the words of this next song, our closing song of the choir sings that this is my song, because it really speaks to this idea that wherever anyone lives, they have a hope that there will be peace, and they have a hope that their perspective will be acknowledged. Thank you.
This is my song, O God of all
peace, and go in love.
Good morning. Shirley Harrison, treasurer. So that means I'm going to tell you talk about money. We have been bequeathed, blessedly, with a gift from a member of $75,000 to be used to hire a full-time minister over 5 years. That, in our budget, we are short and have been short about $23,000 a year. So we have $75,000, $15,000 a year, leaving us a gap of $8,000. So I told the board about this, and I said, we've got this gap. And by the end of the board meeting, members of the board had made up $4,000 of that $8,000 gift. And then I reached out to some friends, and we have met the match, and we are able now to search for a full-time minister for 5 years. It's a good feeling. So when the stewardship time comes around, know that your pledge will help. If you increase your pledge, it does show signs that we're here and we're good, and know that we have the backing of some really great members to help make our message known. So thank you. And also, on the side, we have modified our loan, our mortgage, and our savings $4,000 a year on interest payments, and that'll be used to help with the upkeep and the maintenance of the building. We'll just roll it right into that part of the budget. I know Martin is happy about that. So thank you all for your generous gifts.
I have a couple of announcements, but I can't beat that. I'm sorry. Today is the day we're going to take down the silent witnesses out by the road. So if anyone can help with that, it would be greatly appreciated. We need to haul them back into storage. Next week, Reverend Joe Donatone will be with us, so I'm looking forward to that, and I hope that we'll have good attendance. This is great today. We have a good amount of people here compared to the past few weeks. Maybe people are getting their boosters. Take a look at the last part of your order of worship to see some other announcements and the calendar. Our Sisters Keepers are meeting today at 2:30 via Zoom, and the topic's going to be welcoming the stranger, and we'll be about the Afghan refugee crisis. Thank you.